Station to station is a landscape of ideas, constantly changing, constantly evolving. Always asking, what is creativity in the 21st century?
A happening is an art form which was introduced to get closer to the public, to bring everything closer together.
The road is this great place of churn, place of transition.
Just kind of its own weird thing, and I feel like something very, very special is happening.
I'm interested in this landscape without horizon.
I've always had the impression that we were going with the mood of the moment.
Here it is, bop, 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 bop. And so the information is so immediate and so precise.
Listening to what you're really doing, paying attention to what you're doing in the most minute detail.
People believe things are possible, and that is a fertile place for art to really flourish.
What's wonderful about the road trip is that it's about desire. First off, the landscape as it's framed through the window is an astonishing thing. It is never enough. You always must have more. You must see more. You have to continue. You know, you end when you're exhausted.
Is the room spinning or am I spinning? Because I think the room's spinning and I think I'm standing still. I don't know. It's all relative.
I think I'm excited about not always knowing exactly where I am.
Been doing railroad work for 37 years. It's the easiest way to put it. It's the best job I've ever had in my life.
Is there such a thing as the frontier anymore, right? It's always been imaginary, but now I think it's even more imaginary.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Marc Stiegler, Director of Art Basel, and I'm here to welcome you to the beginning of the Art Basel Conversation series. We are well into the second decade of this series in Miami Beach, which is just an amazing thing when I think about how it started. And I have to say, although it's always been very strong, this is a particularly strong series of panels and talks that we have. We will start today with the conversation between Michelle Kuo of Artforum and Doug Aitken, whose Station to Station project you just saw. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. Tomorrow we have a very interesting conversation on the pitfalls and the possibilities of the globalization of the museum worlds. On Saturday we have, for the first time in Miami, a series that we started in Hong Kong called The Artist and the Gallerist, where we will have Abraham Cruz Villegas, the Mexican artist, speaking with Jose Curi, who has been his gallerist since the beginning of Curi Monzuto Gallery. And then on Sunday, a topic which is dear to my heart, which is the crossover of art and technology, Hans Ulrich Oldrich's continuation of the artist as, and in this case it's the artist as technologist, which is about artistic practice. I encourage you to try to come to all of them. I know it's tough. I know it's tough to come out on Thursday morning. I'm sure it'll be even tougher to come out on Sunday morning. If you happen to miss it, everything goes online, both the conversation series and the salons in the afternoon. Let me just quickly say a word about today's panel. One of the things that's made Art Basel Conversations so interesting is that we've really tried to keep it quite topical, quite timely. A few years ago, when Ai Weiwei had his first terrible run-in with the Chinese authorities, we were able to get him on stage only a few months later, and as soon as I heard about the stationalization project, and I realized to my great dismay that I would not be able to attend because I managed to come to New York 2 days too late and to leave San Francisco 2 days too early, thereby missing both ends of the trip, I thought, well, what would the second best thing would be at least we should try to bring Doug to Miami Beach to talk about it, because I think it's a very, very interesting project. I mean, I think people first thought of Doug as a maker of videos, and then as a maker of public installations, and then as a maker of sculptures and room size installations, and then this project is beyond any sort of terminology. So I'll let Doug talk about it.
No, keep going.
Oh yeah, okay. And I will say that I have to say this was very much a touch and go thing, because I spoke to Doug literally the day before the train took off, and he kind of said yes, but he also, I think, probably hadn't slept properly for a few weeks and knew he certainly wasn't going to sleep properly for a few weeks. So it wasn't really until about a week and a half after the train came to its final destination that we dared to ask him whether he was going to come. And I'm so happy that he said yes, and I'm going to let you take it from here. Thank you very much for coming out, and I hope you enjoyed this and all of the conversations.
Thank you.
Do you want to just begin with a short description of what this was?
You should begin, Michelle. Yeah. And first of all, I want to say thank you all for waking up.
Yes.
I know it's probably very difficult and it's early. And
10 o'clock.
This is the first coffee I've had in about 4 months. So it's a very special occasion. It's like a tea ceremony. It's a Miami version of a tea ceremony. So, yes, we begin when we begin.
Well, I guess the first question I had, which maybe can open out just to a broader description of this project, was how much was scripted in advance, how much was planned in advance versus how much was open to contingency, to chance, to things that just happened as they happened?
Well, maybe to talk about Station to Station as a project a little bit. I think for myself, the project really kind of came out of a necessity. This was something that we were working on for about 3 or 4 years, and it felt to me that there was a necessity to have other options for culture. That there was a kind of, I look at this table right now and I see a number of vessels that are separated from each other. And, in a lot of ways, contemporary art is here, film is here, literature is here, architecture is here. There's a lot of space in between at times. And, I felt that there was a necessity to kind of make a platform for experimentation. Experimentation that was outside of the traditional capitalist structure, that was empowering the artists to make things that were unique and that they could make while in a nomadic situation or on the road or outside of an institutional structure. So for myself, it was really it was about empowering the audience and the creators to have new options.
It's, in a sense, it relates to this dynamic that Happenings, which you invoked as a historical precedent, had as well, which is that there were actually certain scripted actions, but then within that structure, there were ways in which, obviously, chance events occurred.
Yeah, and I think that aspect of chance is so incredibly important for the creative act, and that idea of not mapping out everything exactly and just simply executing it. I mean, Hitchcock's an amazing director, but at the same time, Hitchcock would script everything, storyboard everything, and I think I remember reading a quote where he said, "It's very boring for me to actually make a movie." When it's actually made. And, I think a project like this is looking at a very opposite direction. It's looking at the idea of engaging in the process and that idea of active discovery and letting that sense of discovery feed into works that are, in this project, were often being made in real time.
Right.
So.
And you had some interesting anecdotes about people coming along the way at each different stop, getting a very different audience.
Yeah.
Obviously, a very different locality at each place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was another aspect which was was very interesting about the project. Was this was not a tour, it was not a package. We didn't kind of take this container and put it on the road. It was essentially an exquisite corpse. So as the project traveled, every stop was different people, different musicians, different artworks generated for that place, or things generated while in motion. So you have this journey of 3,500 miles, 4,000 miles over 3.5 weeks, but all the time it's creating new languages as opposed to variations on a theme. And I think that was another aspect of the idea of this as a larger experiment was, can we have something which is, there's someone might ride from point A to point B and then leave.
Right.
And and something's created along the way, but there really is no continuum other than the idea of this kind of symphony of voices in the present.
And you'll also, you view this as something that is continuing even now, and it's interesting thinking about archival documentation or the types of works that stem from the project, like sculptures that you've been making, the Earth piece, et cetera.
Yeah, and as I'm looking behind you, I see these flags that Lawrence Weiner made, and I love that idea that there's this kind of spectrum of people. You have someone like Lawrence who's, I don't know, in his mid-70s or something, and Lawrence says, I want to make a flag for each stop, and when you get there, it should only be shown, this should only be shown in Santa Fe or Barstow or something,
right?
Or you have an artist like Ed Ruchet, and Ed says, I talked to him over the summer. He says, Doug, I don't want to make a painting or a drawing. I want to make an edible artwork. So we end up making 300 cactus omelets only to be served in the Arizona desert for Ed. So it's on that hand you have artists who are have an incredible legacy behind their work, and on the flip side of that you have people who are young and new and making things and just starting to kind of build their vocabulary and approaching the project in different ways, like Liz Glynn or Sam Falls or something, who are kind of making these process-based pieces, on the train while it's in motion. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, though, too, because that legacy of action or the ephemeral process is so connected to the history of painting. Capro is indebted to Pollock, and so it's kind of interesting to see that art history come through a lot of the projects.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about that idea as a legacy, and the legacy of even if you go back to mediums like painting or drawing, one of the extraordinary pieces on this project, which I love personally, is a piece that Olafur Eliasson did, and Olafur called me up midsummer and he said, Dog, I've got this idea. He's probably in the audience and he's going to hear me imitating him. But, he said, I have this idea and, I'd like to make a drawing machine. And this drawing machine can create drawings from the Atlantic to the Pacific using the kinetic motion of the train. So he kind of, created this contraption and I think tested it out in the subways in Berlin over the summer.
Right.
And then it was this object that would kind of, create these, going back to Pollock, it would create these, black lines due to speed, momentum, and kinetic motion on white paper, and it would be changed from every stop to stop.
Right.
So it became a kind of mapping device. Yeah. I think that's also like what you were saying, Michelle, about this, this earthwork that we made. We found ourselves collecting about 500 pounds to a ton of earth at every stop, and just excavating it and putting it on one car, in these containers. And then when we got back, we created these rammed earth sculptures that were like literally timelines, like 5-foot tall timelines that's compressing this entire kind of coast-to-coast journey. So
it's incredible.
Yeah. You talk more. I'm talking too much.
No, the focus is on station to station, and I guess to that end, another interesting convergence is that you're really looking at distribution and circulation in a way of not a static artwork, but these paths or networks of travel, but embedded within this incredibly archaic device of the train, which is...
Yeah, exactly. And I think the metaphor of those parallel lines was very important for the project. The idea that, you mentioned, Alan Caparrow's happenings in the 60s. Just now you noted, how kind of Paleolithic the train system is in America. You have this kind of archaic system that is not really used by passengers that much, yet it creates these incredible arteries across the country and runs through a landscape which is largely unseen. So I think that the duality of kind of working within a system like that, which is rusted and analog and physical, and you're there and touching it and smelling it. And then I want to have a kind of parallel line, like a line of light that's moving simultaneous with this project, which is this idea of creating these moments in time that can be shared. And that going into something which is probably distinctly 21st century. And that idea that we can see this train almost as a kind of radio tower or a beacon that's projecting these stories and experiences out there, that you can be in Hong Kong or Berlin and kind of follow this series of short films that are kind of coming up daily through this experience. So to me, that was a way to really attempt to take the ideas that were coming out of this project, the ideas that were being created, the philosophies and questions, and use this project as a form of dissemination to kind of really give these ideas away in a very non-material way.
Can you talk about the train? How did you get it? And what was the process? Because obviously it's a special, it's a singular train.
Yeah, I think it was a very arduous process at first, trying to track down Amtrak and get the rail lines. I was very fortunate to work with some incredible people in this project who it just became like a family almost. And I think we all shared this belief that we could somehow get this Fitzcarraldo over this jungle mountain. But I think that the train situation was amazing. We found this kind of train guru prodigy kid in his mid-20s who's obsessed with these trains, and I said, you should be the curator, you should curate the trains. So he cobbled together all these different cars from different parts of America, and then we had this kind of train in front of us that the objective was two things. The objective was to make a nomadic studio, so art could be created on it, also music could be created on it, and then to give these cars over to artists. So for example, one of my first phone calls was Jorge Pardo. I said, Jorge, I have this train, like, what would you like to do with it? Can you do something with it? And he said, I think Jorge's solution was, he said, well, trains are rhythms and rhythms are patterns, so I'll make a pattern, and the pattern can become like tapestries that run throughout the interior of the train. So the problem solving was so interesting because everyone had their own take. So then you're sitting there, in some strange psychedelic pattern that Jorge has made while this train's going 60 miles per hour through the desert, and you see the same color chrome of the shrubs and brush matching what's around you in Jorge's work. So the idea of site specificity was interesting. Right here at this slide, that if we go back one, it was this also, I want to talk about this because although we're in this convention center and it's filled with art with a capital A, there was aspects of this project that also we wanted to bring in things that were entirely local to places that we stopped at. And what we have here is we were in Kansas City. We went to all the locations in advance of the project, and really tried to kind of tap into what's in those communities, what's happening, coming from the underground. And in Kansas City, we found this group called the Kansas City Marching Cobras. And it's this kind of inner city dance group that's been around since, I think, 1969. And it was originally a way of kind of getting, inner city youth off the streets and, doing this kind of strange mashup dancing. But when I saw it was completely compelling. It was like this amazing kind of hypnotic trance-like, kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but, when we saw it, it was just, it was something that, I wish I could find it documented, so, we talked to this group, this troupe, and, it was, could we get you to New York? So we had these school buses going from Kansas City to New York, and then Pittsburgh, and, when this erupted for me, it just brought this kind of joy, like this amazing grassroots, surreal, hallucinogenic, trance-like dance choreography, that's kind of erupting, and it's erupting outside a Karsten Holler sculpture or something like that. So is that kind of friction and tension.
Can you get that in this
mic?
We
don't have
really
normal
hard to get sound around here. So. But it's also interesting because I guess I wonder how you grappled with, or you thought about also this friction between the transience of going through all of these places, but then what do you leave behind, or what is that social engagement? And I think that's a question that has come to the fore quite a bit, in other artist projects recently too.
Yeah, and I think that also goes back to the idea of maybe in some ways in contemporary art we need to look towards the dematerial, not the material, and maybe the emphasis is on an experience or something that's an idea or concept or something that's time-based that goes inside you instead of something that's placed in an institution in your town or city. So I think the project for me was much more about that. It was much more about this idea of this kind of rhythm of ideas, and perhaps a metaphor that I thought to myself as we were developing it was really the ultimate vision for me would be if this project were, I could open this door and I could walk inside the space, and I knew a few things inside the space that I was very attracted to, but I discovered a myriad of things which I wasn't familiar with, and I started to see how it became a complete language. So I really wanted a situation where there was no one who really was completely familiar with everything.
Right. Whether the producers, whether the artists, or the local audience, whoever they may be.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, though, because you've taken a huge amount of film footage as well of the entire project. So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that was, the Station to Station was, this kind of physical moment in time, but it was also something where, I recognize that, many of these moments in time, encounters, individuals, I really wanted to make an effort to film that and to cover that and to, make hundreds of short films to just give away and to, let those voices be heard, whether that's, Terrell, in Rodin Crater, talking about the process of buying the land from 76 to 78, or whether it's Bill the Hitchhiker that we found in the Mojave, who just goes into this incredible description of living without baggage, So it's this kind of it's an architecture of ideas and stories that I think really makes the project. And maybe that architecture can build up to create a broadcast tower and just allow these stories to be shared.
I wonder if you could talk about scale a little bit in that sense, because so much of your work has been about combining, for example, the projected image with an architectural scale. And this scale of the train and the scale of this, the footage being dispersed into space. You're sort of being very ambitious in terms of the scale.
Well, it seemed like it had to happen.
It's a cone-like answer, but yes. But why?
Well, I think the idea of movement, the idea of doing a project that was in movement, for me it came back to a project that we did called Black Mirror that was about 3 years ago. And it was a project that we staged in Greece. And the narrative of this work was really is about nomadicism. It was kind of about this idea of a modern condition where the individual is constantly in movement, and in movement in a way where the past and memory is almost erased. And to stage this work, I thought about, originally it was going to be a kind of theater opera piece that we were going to do in Athens. And then I thought, if the idea is movement, maybe the platform should be moving. So we found this decommissioned barge and staged the work, and kind of the audience would go on it and kind of go from dusk into night, through the Mediterranean while the different chapters of the work unfolded. So that made me question the idea of stasis. It made me question the idea of do we have to only use things that are frozen and fixed in place? And can we bring the idea of place into question? So then I think that kind of informed Station to Station, and it empowered me to take greater risks in terms of making something that was really embracing movement and change. This is an image of interior of Urs Fischer's tent, and Urs being Urs, of course, didn't tell me what he's going to do until a week before. And Urs had designed this nomadic yurt tent, and the yurt tent inside was his idea of this kind of paradise-like space where anything goes. So there's mirrored walls, there's a disco ball, there's smoke machines, there's a king-size bed with an extra plush mattress, and no one can see what happens because it's so smoky. So, Urs thought, we'll just take this kind of love den and we'll take it on the road, and it can stop in different towns, and people can interpret it as they like. So, like that, that kind of going back to this idea of nomadicism, I think some people really kind of took this idea of, can we make a nomadic stage and empower the viewer to just occupy it and do what they want? And
a truly interactive work.
Yeah, interactive.
But what's interesting too is that there's always a media component as well, and I think that's what's interesting is that you take this investigation of an interactive or an open work, but you combine it with its mediatization, which is to say its representation via video or film or the website, which I know you've also said was a really important, almost like the locus of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in Michelle's, you're really kind of talking about this idea of maybe more of an aerial view of the project, and the system of the project, how it functions, how it communicates. And I think for us, our goal was to make something that was ephemeral and dematerial, but it could communicate, it could connect with people. So kind of the first thing you do is you remove place and weight, and you look for a lighter model, and you look for something that is almost can just move through the airwaves. So we found that kind of creating a website was maybe the word almost sounds silly when you talk about it, but for us it was really valuable because it becomes this platform for so many voices and so much content, and it can become this kind of living organism, and in a way also it democratizes the experience. It makes it something which, wherever you are, South America or Finland, you can kind of tap into what's being generated and what's happening here.
And how did you choose some of your collaborators? I mean, I know a lot of them obviously were friends or colleagues, but you obviously had this very long-range project of trying to find people in each place. Maybe you can talk about that even a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I wanted something that I didn't want it to be only artists or musicians. I wanted to kind of, to have as many systems at play simultaneously as possible, And, it became most inspiring for me when you would find someone who would really have an idea, someone who didn't want to just superimpose what they made into the project, but wanted to use the project as a platform for creating something wholly new, and to experiment with it, and and that the range of that was so extreme and dynamic. You have a musician like Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth who says, I want to make a sound piece using the train, miking the train live, and then playing off the rhythms of this train as it's going at a certain speed, or Giorgio Moroder, who's one of our kind of the DNA of electronic music and dance music, and Giorgio says, I want to create this piece, and it's going to be this song cycle, but it's going to go from this destination to this destination, and when we hit the end, that's the song. There's no more, there's no less. So I think things like that to finding moments of crossover more. There's a musician we worked with, Dan Deacon, and Dan is I cannot figure out why Dan isn't considered an incredible performance artist.
I think he is, but maybe
I think he
by
is too.
A small,
But Dan's whole thing is, if Dan was in this room, he wouldn't be sitting here drinking coffee and water like I am, like a boring person. Dan would be standing up with a microphone, kind of coming up with these. Everybody stand, create a tunnel, go through the art fair, come out the backside. Like it's a way of like completely activating the audience in such a radical way that, I find, that is absolutely contemporary art at its best, when I see his shows. So I love that also. I love it when we could kind of see things become like very slippery within their context.
It's interesting too because you went to certain places where even the tracks. I think you had said that they had to basically revivify tracks that hadn't been used for the train to get to some of the places that you were going. Is that right? Or to accommodate the train?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything that extreme. We didn't have like grave diggers at midnight exhuming steel.
But what are some of the places that you went to? Because maybe,
Yeah, the locations were, we wanted really kind of a dynamic range, of places which, we all know and have been a million times, New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, but then, spaces which were less visited, maybe a Barstow or a Winslow, Arizona. In San Francisco Bay Area, I really wanted to go to Oakland instead of the city proper. So I think it was interesting because what we found also was the idea that we could activate architecture. There was a lot of dormant architecture, which were these stations, these kind of, some of them were, these amazing WPA era stations, concrete floors, 3-story ceilings, but, with the tumbleweed blowing through it, really kind of just out there. And these spaces, I mean, if I was in Germany and that was a Kunsthalle, my mind would be blown, but I see them here and I'm saying, like, why, these should be activated, at least for a night, or at least for something. So, it was interesting because I think the organic process of choosing a train as a kind of a means of allowing the project to move also opened up these places, these architectural sites, that were really a surprise to us, and and were often dormant or quite inactive.
Yeah, this kind of decaying industrial infrastructure that we really have forgotten about in many ways.
Yeah, at times.
No, that's. I think it's interesting too because in sort of moving through all of these sites, it sounds like you also were able to really attract, I think, some unusual audiences. I know you have had some anecdotes about that as well. But
yeah, and I mean, I think it's when you have these kind of moments where, I mean, for myself, it was difficult to absorb as much as I would have liked because we were so in it. But I do recall this moment in Winslow, Arizona, and it was like the train had got in. It was evening. I went out to just go to the market or something, and I'm like walking down this dark street, and this kind of shadowy figure came out and walks up to me, and I look at him, and the first thing he says, "Hey man, I just came off the reservation, and do you know anything about the station thing?" And I didn't have a chance to really say anything. He said, "Yeah, because I came off the reservation. I heard there was no tickets available, but I want to go to the Winslow radio station. I heard they're having a raffle for tickets." And I said, "Are you kidding? Like, just give me a list of everyone you know, and just come tomorrow." I mean, so it was this kind of interesting moment. The following day, like an hour before the happening started, I saw this guy that I talked to just with his family, his aunts, this whole entourage from, I think, the Navajo reservation. Yeah. And then fast forward a few hours later, and I was, doing my thing, and I look, and there's this projection of Fish and Vice, and, the tire is burning to the string, to the candle, the way things are, the way things go. And then I look over in the shadows, I see him, and I see this guy that I talked to the evening before, really kind of intensely following this film, and it was almost like I could see this mechanism in the expression of his face, like saying, I have access to everything here. I could make this. I could make something like this, And it was really this, for me, it was a very provocative moment, and it kind of it shed a light on the project that was very different than someone, who has all access to all culture all the time, So you never know.
It's interesting, too, I guess, the question of access, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how even just getting a project like this off the ground, I know you're always interested in questioning other modes of distribution, like other market types of modes as well, and so, what does it mean to try and get sponsorship for a project like this and have that whole structure alongside, that market structure alongside this ephemeral, participatory, localized set of events?
What's the question?
So I saw the New York stop, and it was interesting because there were all of these performances happening. There were the yurts outside in Brooklyn, and there was also a Levi's station with they were making jeans, and I thought it was just interesting, this integration of a commercial sponsor within this whole
I thought it was really,
environment.
for me it was really interesting because this project was, a very difficult project to kind of, create and get going. And, it was interesting because, at this point, if I go to an exhibition at the Guggenheim, at the Whitney, I see every show is underwritten by some place, and I think for us, our studio and the people involved in this, we said, we want to do something very different. We want to do something that doesn't have a place, and and how do we do this? And I think we were very fortunate that there was a few places that really helped us out with it, and I'm super grateful for that.
And is there anything you want to take away after having gone through the journey and completed the train ride?
I think the project was really about giving it away. It was about making something that we could give away, and and a sense of connectivity, a sense of experimentation. And I guess for myself, it's I feel that the project really did come out of a need, a necessity, and I kind of keep coming back to that because I feel that we as a culture, as we move forward, what reflects our lives, art, film, cinema, different aspects of culture. But if and we can talk about contemporary art today because we're standing or sitting in this fair, if contemporary art slows down and becomes calcified and frozen, and it ceases to grow and experiment and become vital, it loses its meaning. It loses its essential value to us in the present. And I think that for me, the project was about trying to provoke an alternative to that sense of stasis, that sense of commodification and rigidity. And that's the work that I've always been fascinated by, is the work which is taking risks, which is experimenting, which is trying something that is unorthodox or that surprises me in a way, and with this project I felt almost more like I wanted to be to make this platform for other people to use, and the artists involved, the musicians involved, but also the audience, and to kind of create a possibility for these moments in time that have perhaps a sense of radical friction to happen, and to get out there. So I don't know. This is what happens when I have a little coffee.
Me too.
Stop me. Help.
Well, on that note, maybe it's a good time to open it up to the audience here and see if there are any
you guys don't care.
Radical moments of surprise that await us. I don't know how you guys want to do this, but there's a question in the front, I think.
Hi.
Claudia?
We have microphones, and if you get the microphone, if you could please stand up and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia O'Sullivan. I'm the editor of Fresco magazine. I just wanted to ask, a little bit more how you were influenced by the stops. That was really nice what you said about the guy from the Navajo reservation. But we're such a big country. East Coast to West Coast, in between, and almost from an anthropological, point of how this talented group would travel through, and what was the actual interaction like, that you were giving them an experience, you were giving the necessity of giving, but what did you take, and how was that interaction, and were there other groups that maybe stayed with you for a day, or you wanted to just sort of bring someone on the train that you met in Iowa or something? I don't know.
I mean, ironically, kind of, all the things that you've mentioned happened. I think there's moments where, you run across someone who just really, wants to go from point A to point B with us, and, we would try to accommodate that and just say, just get on and you do something, but at the same time, I mean, to really answer your question, it's difficult because it's a very personal question. I think, everyone who is, maybe at one stop or maybe part of it has their own take on that. what they've experienced personally. For myself, what I was fascinated by was I was constantly reminded of how we're used to seeing the world in a mediated way, on a screen, in a cinema, on the screens of our phones, and as you're moving, you're looking out the window, and it's as if kind of the landscape becomes cinema, and the cinema is being projected towards you, but then when you stop, it's shocking. You're out there and it's so tactile, and that was very powerful for me, because I think that we need to be cautious that we don't live inside a world that's become completely synthetic, that's not tactile, that's not physical, and the immediacy that I found within the project was a great reminder of that, and the kind of the breadth of the landscape and the influence of the landscape on how you think when you're not making something, even how subconsciously things feed into you. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Carol Padberg, and I'm the director of Nomad 9. And one of the things I wanted to thank you for is breaking down the barriers between audiences and art, and also giving people a sense of possibility. I have a feeling what you did was very contagious, and that when you went to locations, people had a new sense of what was possible and how art and creativity can enter their lives in many, many ways. Do you have any stories about how that contagion might have played out?
I love, first of all, I love that word. And I was having lunch with someone yesterday, and they were saying these words. It was like contagion, viral, strategy, all these kind of, all these words, which are really fascinating, because it's like in the last decade they've become neutral to positive. A virus, it's a viral idea. Everyone's like, yeah, viral. But I think that, like, for me, I see each work as an experiment, every project I do, and I think that this project was, I want to really try to remove myself from it. And, like here, this is an image of Peter Coffin's UFO. This is in Barstow. Peter had made this UFO work, and I think only shown it in Europe. And here's a situation where Barstow's, it's not a very touristed place in the desert, really. I don't know if you've been there, but it was on Route 66 originally. Then they put an interstate that passes it by. No one really goes there. It's loaded with hotels and motels that have intense amounts of vacancies. There's a drive-in movie theater there. This drive-in has 2 huge screens. It shows B movies. So we stopped there, and here's this possibility to kind of use these screens and to show a Bruce Conner film or a Whitney Brothers film. Stephen Shore, the photographer, Stephen Shore. When I talked to him about the project, you think of Stephen, you think of American Surfaces or Uncommon Places, and these magnificent photographs of banal locations. And Stephen says, Doug, I've got this idea. I want to do a 24-hour photographic happening. I said, what the hell are you talking about, Stephen? And he says, I want to go to Winslow, Arizona, 24 hours before your train gets there. I want to photograph as much as I can and not edit it. And then the following stop in Barstow, where this drive-in theater is, I want to project my photographs on the drive-in. And moments like that were so amazing, because you see Stephen completely stepping out of his milieu, working in this way where he's shooting digitally, he's projecting. I don't know if he's ever projected before. He's doing something where these images will only be seen at this one place at this one time for this one, hour or something. So I think, this is like I'm sorry, I've totally deviated from your question, but yeah, it's those kinds of things, I think. So I don't know. Let's all get some coffee. At the beach.
Yeah, exactly. We never see the beach when we're at this fair.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Feinberg. I want to thank you for this. It's been a wonderful conversation. It's a terrific piece. Something I'm curious about is, 45 years ago when Christo and Jean-Claude did projects in the public space like this, there were very codified protocols for how they financed it. And you haven't said much about how you paid for this and what whether that was part of the thought process of the project. I'd love to hear more about the financing.
Sure. Well, the project was primarily funded by Levi's, and then some other places also helped. And then there was a huge amount of in-kind support. And then there was a lot of help also from places like Amtrak that helped us with the rails. And it was kind of it was really what's that cliche? It takes a community to build a building or something. Whatever.
It takes a village?
Yeah, village. It takes a village. It really just kind of took all these elements and parties to kind of make this. So I there's just too many people to thank, and a lot of people in this room were, part of this and integral to it. And, everyone, Elise, Molly, everyone, Life. I mean, Life, who's out here, who's a chef, who's Oakland, Berkeley based, was on the train for the entire journey. We talked to Alice Waters about food, and we said, let's think of a concept for everything. Let's not take things for granted. If we have to eat while we're working, what do we eat? Can it have a meaning? Can it have a concept behind it? So Alice said, I'd really love this to be part of the slow food movement, and I'd love the concept that when this train stops at each location, it's met with local growers. And we only buy from local growers, not from supermarkets. And Life, who's, are you here? He's sleeping in probably. But so he kind of arranged this kitchen on the train, and would just make this food. And that for me was as important as someone who's on stage performing. This idea that the concepts, nothing should be overlooked, and concepts should impregnate everything, and if you have to do something, there should be a reason for it. You don't take it for granted. So it's that ethos, I think, really kind of permeated the project, and I was just fortunate to have collaborators and so many people who kind of got that. So yeah, I don't know.
Looks like there's one in the back.
Hi, my name is Monique Berger. Doc, I love you. I love your work. We all know life is the journey. We are part of it, and I just wanted to know if you actually consider making a publication of the whole journey from the West to the East Coast. If you're going to write about it, that we could read more about this wonderful piece.
Yeah, and Monique, I think that's a really good question that kind of opens up a slightly larger expanse, which is really, I think station to station, there's really kind of two parts to it. There's what has transpired, this kind of journey, and then everything that's come out of it. And I think that right now we're really looking at how can we take that and give that away and put that out there. And and to me that should be many things. It should be the hundreds of hours of footage that we filmed. Like, how can we make short films and just give them away? How can we work with institutions to kind of share the content and the artworks that are created from this? We want to give the music that was created on the train to NPR so they can broadcast it. I think it just should be something that grows and changes. But also I'd love for this idea to be something which can live on. And if there's something 2 years down the road that happens in the Amazon or the Mediterranean, like we would love to be helping to sculpt that and put it out there. So I don't know.
Well, I think there are books as well for signing later that Claudia was motioning to us.
But anyways, thank you all for coming and for your time and being here without coffee at 10 a.m.
It's truly impressive.
It's truly impressive. Stephen Shore says thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.